Thank you all for being here. I'm Jamila Robinson. I'm an AME, which means Assistant Managing Editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm just getting comfy here. And I am so excited to be here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, James Beard Foundation, Zoe and Megan, for putting this together. It's getting to the end of the day. We've heard a lot about everything from mental health and leadership, strategy, brand, and now we're going to talk about power and what power and leadership means. I'm so excited to be here with Cristina Bowerman and Ruth Gresser, and so I'm going to kick things off a little bit and to talk about power. What do we do with it? What does it even mean? Who gets to decide? What does it mean to be a leader? So I would love for Ruth and Cristina to kind of talk about what happened when you knew you were going to be a leader? What did that feel like? And what brought you to leadership? I'll start with you, Ruth.
Hi, everybody. When I was asked this particular question, there is an exact moment that I understood my life had changed. And that was just a couple of months into opening my restaurants. Well, at the time it was just one restaurant. But I was in the kitchen, and the staff members that I was working with at the time started a conversation about former bosses. And, you know, I'm standing there chopping onions with them just like I'm one of the crew, right? And I'm listening to this conversation, and suddenly this moment, this switch, it was like, they're talking about me now. I am the boss. And when they go on to their next job, it's me that they're going to talk about. And so in that moment, I recognized the shift that, frankly, I mean, I opened my restaurant when I was 32. It's certainly old enough to be a leader. There are lots of leaders that are a lot younger than that. But I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that what I was doing was stepping into a leadership role. And it was in that moment that I recognized it.
Well, I'm not really sure, because there are several moments in which I realize I have power. But if we talk about power in general, you know, it's like when you walk into a room or when you sit down at a table with some other people and you say something and people will listen to you and will probably even do what you said that should be done. But in reality, for me, power has like a deeper meaning. The power of knowing how much I'm worth it, how much I can change. You see, I have a specific, very important consideration of anybody that is around me, or in general, a human being. I think that each of us has a particular skill that nobody else has. So when you succeed in finding what is that you're good at, not only you will find joy in life because you will do what you like, but you will probably achieve the best what you can do. And that's, for me, the real power.
That is some real power, and that's a really great definition of leadership, is being able to harness that. How do you define leadership, Ruth?
How do I define it? I think that defining leadership is really, it's sort of, I think I can define my leadership. Like, I think it's important for all of us to figure out how we lead. And in order to figure out how you lead, you also have to define who you're leading. And one thing that I've noticed over the years is the notion of that my staff is kind of self-selects. And that it self-selects based on the elements of the culture that's been created by how my staff responds to that. And when I when I recognized this moment and recognized that I was in this position, I kind of recognized that I had the power to define what this organization was going to be and how was I going to do that. And for me, the important things were kindness and respect and curiosity. And so people who succeed in the organization that I created respond well to that. And so understanding who your staff is and how you want to lead, I think is really important. I'm not sure I answered the question exactly.
I think you answered it very well. I mean, think kindness, respect, and curiosity. I mean, what a beautiful way to bring that to other people. And then I love what you just said about self-selecting, that means that you're going to bring in people with kindness, respect, and curiosity. Were there things like that, Cristina, that helped define how you were going to run your restaurant, how you were going to lead in some of the other work that you were doing?
Well, since I was a kid, probably because I'm the first of 3 kids, so they say that the first one is generally the one that, powers through certain things, and your parents are like more rigid with you. They try to tell you off more often. So I was actually the leader of my brother and sister. So I already knew I had a strong personality. But as time went by and as I grew up, I realized, and nowadays it's actually more clear than any other time in our lives, that you can be a good leader or a bad leader. I always try to be a good leader, which means exactly what she was saying. Being a good leader is the person that people look at, and they want to have a kind of like sort of clarification of where they're heading. And a good leader is the one that respects, that puts in evidence the human factor of the people that surrounds you. A good leader is coherent, which is something that not everybody or not every day happens. So I try to have these principles always with me in order to be a good leader. And I noticed that, as time went by, you get authority within your own kitchen, but also in your community. And people respect what you do, but only. And that's why they say leaders are generally alone, because sometimes you have to take tough decisions. Sometimes you have to take decisions that are not popular because it will be easier, And so people look up to you and they say, okay, Cristina, what would you do? And that's when you come up with some ideas, most of them good, some others not that good. But you come up with ideas, or, you kind of like show people where to go. Some of the projects we were talking about earlier, the psychologist, was all of my idea. And when I proposed that to the people, vice presidents on, they looked at me and they said, okay. I said, well, I don't care, I'm gonna go through, because I knew what power I had and I could do it. And instead it has been one of the most successful projects that the association succeeded in getting through. So power for me, it's a lot of qualities all together, but more than anything else, being coherent with your principles.
Well, you just said something that I think is really key about having ideas and wanting to go forth and take that initiative. Being a first child probably is helpful in that, of being able to say, I have this idea, I'm going to go forth and do it. Were there times when we talked a lot about today about having a seat at the table, like looking at another room? Were there times that you looked up and you saw something and you saw, oh, I have an idea, I have a solution, and I need to harness that power, and I'm going to take the lead on that? What were some of the things that you did, or some of the ideas you had?
Well, I mean, there are several. I always try to think without being forced by all the social pressure. That's one of the reasons for which I left the south of Italy and I moved away. I came here to the States, which still today, I think it has been the most forming experience I've ever had. I mean, I'm here right now and I am who I am because I had the opportunity of living here for 16 years. So I formed myself as a person and as a professional here. And you have lots of freedom. There's meritocracy much more than you can find in Italy. So I always take things, try to look at situations and come up with different solutions. The psychology is one, but also, for instance, I put together a beautiful project that is being very successful right now. It's Adopt a Producer. Because you see, whenever you sit down with men, they come up with like these big words and so on, and they prospect like a sort of like white light at the end of the tunnel full of diamonds or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's talk seriously. I'm like, what can we actually do? How can we go to point A to point B and make people understand what we are doing? So I came up with this idea right before pandemic, adopt a farmer. Because everybody always talks about how can we link the restaurant business to the farming, and how can we make sure that people use the right products, how can we support them? Beautiful words. I heard them throughout the UN speeches like so many times, but like, how can we do this? So I came up with this idea and I put it on the table and I made sure that everybody understood. And I said, this project costs absolutely nothing, but will do a world of good to everyone. And so every ambassador adopts a farmer or producer or whatever it is. Not only he or she develops like an educational process toward the consumer, but also buys, because that person is obliged to use that particular product in the restaurant. So especially throughout the pandemic, was extremely useful for all the farmers and producers, because they could get money, even though they were not working as much as before. And so I think that with those two projects and other that I followed, I don't even remember right now, getting old, but these are only the two ones that I proposed and created by myself throughout the last, I would say probably 3 years, and they were extremely successful. So now when I sit down and I have something to say, people listen to me. Because it's like, okay, she came up with 2 out of the 3 most important projects of this association. So most likely she will come up with an idea. Or for instance, everyone in Italy discovered throughout pandemic that there's actually smart working. It's like, oh, there's smart working. Well, I put my assistant in smart working 7 years ago. I went to her and I said, you know what? There's no need for you to come every day to the restaurant. Why? I mean, you can do everything from your home. So 3 days a week she would stay at home, and 2 days a week she would come to the restaurant. And she was happy, I was happy, everybody was happy. And now everybody's talking about smart working. So coming up with ideas, and when I said that, people would look at me, it's like, are you crazy? I'm like, why? I'm like, for me, if I can do something to make people's lives better, like that, I do it. Okay. San Pellegrino is not going to be very happy that I dumped that bottle.
So Ruth, you've had a really long career. You're on a lot of boards, a lot of leadership opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about who opened doors for you, and how did you have to rethink your value when you had to take on all of these roles with the Restaurant Association of Metro Washington and some of the other leadership roles that you're doing that are outside the restaurants?
Well, for me, the leadership roles that I have outside of the restaurant were something that I actually pursued, because while I recognized that I was a leader, so I've owned my restaurants for 30 years. The first, I'm going to say probably the first 15 years, I put my head down. My space was the 4 walls of my restaurant, or after 15 years, I had 2. So it was a different world where it took 15 years to have 2 restaurants. But I put my head down and I was working within my restaurant. And at a certain point, I lifted my head and said, I need not only to be the leader, but to be led. And I recognize that this room is full of women who have said that to themselves because they're sitting in this room right now. And you're engaging with James Beard, and I'm sure a lot of other things. And I recognize that in order to expand my own power, I needed to be influenced by others. And the results have been incredible for me. I went from in 2000 and in 2008 I had 2 restaurants. In 2012 I had 4 restaurants. In 2015 I had 5. And then before the pandemic, well, at one point I had 6, and then it went down to 5, and now it's back down to 4, but that is the way life has been lately. But so in really a period of 10 years, I started to do all of these things outside of the restaurant and went from a very small company to a much larger company and wrote a cookbook during that time and began to influence others. And that was the things that came out of that expansion were amazing to me. I mean, the 10 years between, there was a 10-year period that the expansion, both personal and the influence that came with it, was really, really surprising to me, frankly.
So when you moved into not only leadership roles, but also taking on boards and things, can you talk a little bit more about that feeling of needing to be led, of that change in what you require as you are leading other people and managing down, but being able to manage up or manage across, or what kinds of things that you need from other leaders? What kind of influence did you need?
Well, I think there's the collaborative effort that just creates, ideation they talk about, I mean, talking to people just keeps your mind working. And I know, I mean, I've been in this business for 30 years now. And 2 months ago, we went to, we changed from the tip system to service charge. If I had kept my head down for 30 years and stayed in my restaurants, not only would I not have had the number of all of that, but I wouldn't be aware of all of these things that are happening outside of my restaurant that my restaurant can actually, and that I can benefit from, and also the opposite, there's the outward flow of information and ideas as well. I mean, I know that the Restaurant Association here in DC is really I shouldn't say it that way. The Restaurant Association here in DC has taken the stance of opposition to the change to a service charge. I have now completely embraced it, and my entire staff has completely embraced it. At least I hope. And so I'm now looked at as someone that the restaurant community in DC can look to for leadership. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, what you're talking about is having your power take shape more broadly, not only within the restaurant, within the community. People start to see that influence, they start to see ideas, and then all of the other things that you want to see in the world, and that's a great way to affect change. And I think you, Cristina, with some of your work that is outside of the restaurant, is also about influence on sustainability, on women's rights. Can you kind of talk about some of the other things that you want to see in the world?
Yeah. I knew right away, probably because I changed career pretty late. I'm getting close to my 20th year in the business. So before that, my career path is kind of weird because I studied as an attorney. I went through 10 years of graphic design and finally graduated in culinary arts. But I knew right away that I wanted to use basically the power that I would acquire or I had acquired up to that point. But food to transmit culture into something else. I noticed right away, of course, that in any field that I've been at, that I worked through, women were not considered. And what really changed my life were two people, two women. And they were my role models, the people that I would look at. And I would always think, if she did that, I can do it. And switching career is one of them. Linda Elmer, right now she's a business coach. And she actually started a different career. She really changed my life. She's one of my best friends, and she used to be my boss. And so I said, I want to use food to do something else. And for me, it was right away. I worked in the kitchen a lot. This morning you were talking about pregnancies and child and so on. I went back to work 48 hours later. I had Angel Care attached to the window of my kitchen so I could actually hear everything that happened in my house. But I knew I wanted to use that power that I would acquire through food to become a role model, especially in Italy for women. You know how many girls came up to me, and still do to nowadays, that they are told by big names chefs that they actually changed, they decided to be cooks too late. And you know the average age, like 22, 24, I look at them, I'm like, they are screwed up in their brain. I'm like, I changed career when I was 34. So, don't even listen to them. So I knew I wanted to become a role model and also volunteer work. But one of the reasons I say that, I grew up with, certain principles. One of them is the giving back, the payback, pay forward, actually, like you say. I always call it the concept of restitution, kind of like give back to society, because I'm so lucky. I find myself in a position for which I don't even have to look for things to help other people. They follow my lap. And so I work with a lot of IFAD, UN Chef Manifesto. Fiorano for Kids is an association, actually. Onlus, I was one of the founders. I work with women in prison, for instance. Especially Bibbia in Rome. I do their Christmas dinner every year. I try to get involved as much as I can. The Down Syndrome Association, many. And the reason is because I actually use the power that I acquired, more than power, I would say the authority that I acquired in my field to do something else. So whenever somebody asks me for a favor, do you want to come and do like a business, a show, cookie show somewhere here? Yeah, but can you please do me another favor? Can you please give me food for like Christmas, dinner in the prison? So I put my work in exchange for that. I try to do something good for others. Then, like somebody was saying earlier, you do small things until the big things comes. So I consider myself a sort of Robin Hood of the restaurant business. I steal from the rich to give to the poor.
I love that. I love this sort of in these, finding these little pieces of power and influence. Are there times, though, that you have to use your power in a different way? When do you have to pull rank, for example? Or when do you have to cede power? When do you have to say, okay, it's time for me to step aside and let other people lead? Can you talk a little bit about your experiences of finding yourself in different positions and when you have to change what power is relevant, where your power is needed?
Yes. I think two things come to mind, and I think it's very important to just stay true to yourself. Authentic leadership, which can be somewhat vulnerable, but recognizing that you have the power and accepting and just grabbing it when you need to. And I'll talk a little bit about also being a woman in this industry. When I opened Pizzeria Paradiso, I had a partner who was a man, and we had a review, and there was a photograph of me working the pizza oven. And underneath it, it had my partner's name and talked about the restaurant being his. And at that moment, I was just like, what do I do with that? And I didn't do anything for a very long time. But when it got to the point where I understood that I needed to grab my power, I did it. And we were partners for a while, and then we weren't. And that's the simple way of
Can we dive into that? Because I have so many questions. So did you have to talk to your partner, or did you have to go back to the media organization, or can you just give us a little bit more detail about what you did to make that change?
Well, that change happened over years, and there was a point where, I think there's a balance of power in a partnership, and when the balance of power in the partnership is even, then the partnership can continue. And what I recognized over years was that my partner was never going to cede power to me. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I was going to be given the power was if I was going to take it, at which point I said, it's time to dissolve the partnership. And then all of the legal, things happened. But I did not go, at that point, I was too young. That's the other thing, I don't know what the average age in this room is. I said I opened my restaurant at 32. I wasn't ready to take it then. I could take enough to be the boss in that kitchen, but I didn't recognize my power enough to take it in the media. Yeah. So I was willing to go along and continue in my role as, the unspoken partner until I wasn't. And that was my own progression. Just as it was my own progression to get out of the restaurant and see what was out there.
That's a real growth point. Yeah. I mean, I think what we've heard is that, there is an arc to power. There's a point where you become a leader. There's a point where you know what your influence is going to be, and there's a point where you want to share it, and then there's a point where you have to be more vulnerable, or a point where you have to just pull back.
Right.
Were there times like that for you, Cristina, where there was an influence that there was a point where you said, oh, I'm really growing, or I have found a place where I really have to stand my ground?
Oh, every day. I'm like, you have to take decisions like that every day. There are certain things that I do very much agree, not only with what you said, but also the previous speakers, such as authenticity. Like, I think that each of us every day get hit by agencies, I'm going to take over, your Instagram account and so on. Whereas to be authentic, I think it is very important because it transmits exactly who you are, but more than anything else, that's your mirror. You look at what's written on your account because you wrote it and you know who you are. You know when you're lying, you know when you're not. And I think it is a constant struggle to be, the coherence I was talking about earlier. Getting strong and being strong is, I think, an exercise that we need to do every day. A lot of people ask me, why do you wear pink hair? It's a long story to make it, actually short. Right after the 9/11, actually, nobody wanted to travel for my company. I said, I do. And I would get searched 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So I did this social experiment. I started to dye my hair because I didn't know, for anybody at the airport, I was basically a Middle Eastern person. So I started to dye my hair, and actually I was getting searched less. But nowadays, in my position, I sit down with ministers, I go to parliament, I go to, sit down with very important people with my hair. Maybe in the States, it's not that big of a deal, but I can guarantee you in Italy, the comments that the previous speaker she was talking about, that's nothing. You should read some of the comments that they say about me or anybody else, especially if you're a female. If you're a man, they can say you're stupid, but they would never make a comment about how you look. Whereas body shaming is completely like the normality. So in reality, I keep on and I insist with my hair because it's a sort of exercise. I exercise myself to be stronger and stronger every day. And whenever somebody, even important people, say something about my look, I do like this. Nothing. But I really empower myself. I'm like, I don't care. I know how much I'm worth, and that has nothing to do with the way I look. And so, thank you.
Please.
Thank you. So that's when I was saying earlier, power. That's how you acquire. Getting power is a training. It's like putting muscles on. You know, every day you have to do something to empower yourself in order to be aware of how much you're worth it.
Can I also add to that? It's fucking hard. Okay, so, you know, you got to do it every day. It's exercise. You get better at the things that you do constantly, that you pay attention to. I mean, you know, I'm an introvert, and the fact that I'm sitting on this stage, I mean, I'm in the kitchen, you know, like the first time I had to go out into my dining room and be the owner, no, please don't ever ask me to do that again. But now, I mean, of course, now I can do it. But, you know, it was a muscle that I exercised. Power and leadership, these are muscles that you exercise. And to not do it every day, you know, sells yourself short, and it's tiring. You know, it's going to be, it just is.
Do you want to share what we were talking about
well,
earlier?
we were talking earlier about, so should we do it now? Okay, we're going to have a practice session. Do you all know about the Wonder Woman power stance? It's old, so it might be old enough
because
that you
I'm wearing
don't know
my
it
pink
again.
power suit. I mean, the way I
go.
show that is I'm an introvert too. I get up
You get
and
up
do like a little bit of power pose.
and you stand like Wonder Woman with your hands on your hips and your legs spread. And you do it for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, you hold that pose, and you can look up, you put your chest
Hold
out.
that pose.
You stand there and you feel your power. And before you have to go and do something that's hard, you do this for 2 minutes and you will feel different.
Like I feel my hip right now?
You will feel different. I mean, the science is that this releases testosterone and it decreases cortisol. So it brings that the strength of testosterone, and it reduces the stress that cortisol creates. So this is a serious move that you can use for exercise daily to do, you know, what Christina's talking about.
All right, that's our power pose. Anybody have any questions? We're going to go to the floor. Let's do it. Thanks for that, Ruth. That was fantastic. Thanks for everybody for having a little practice power pose with us.
Thank you. So,
You feel a little bit different, don't you?
yes, absolutely.
Oh, one question. Okay, we'll go for it.
So, at different point, different women today have talked about partnerships, investors, you know, and I think in early in people's career or their journey when they want to open a restaurant, right, they're not forced, but they choose to have investors, they choose to take on partners, some because they want to, and others because maybe they don't have a choice. Can you, if you had to give some advice to the ladies in the room about partnerships, investors, there's been some great speakers, because I was asking about that today, like what piece of advice or what things to think about would you do different? Would you like to share? Because I think so many first-timer chefs, or if you have one restaurant or you want to open your own restaurant, it weighs on you because we're not all born with trust funds that you can go and open your own restaurant. And you know, what are those important things to think about in partnerships and raising money, et cetera?
So the couple of things that I would say is, and I'm in the position where I can borrow money from a bank. So I personally like banks better than I like investors. That's my personal bent, but banks are hard to convince to get a loan. But the thing that I want to say about partnerships is, first of all, don't think that a partnership agreement is going to solve your problems, because a partnership agreement is only something to argue over when the partnership gets difficult. And the other thing that I want to say is, if you sense a red flag as you are developing a partnership with someone, please, please listen to that. It's your gut. It's telling you there's something wrong, and you need to pay attention to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the partnership can't go forward, but you need to resolve that before you go forward.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ruth, Gresser, Cristina Bowerman, James Bierfeld, everyone here at Women's Entrepreneurship Leadership Summit. Thank you for being here. Thank you.